What if one year could change your life? What if you took a big risk and it actually paid off? We had a dream of building our own house. No shortcuts, just the two of us figuring it out. At the end of the day, I'm so glad that we did. Before we did anything, the first thing that we had to do was make a plan. We drew a rough outline and sent it to our architecture friend, who helped clean it up and send it to the county. We filled out the permit work and the mortgage paperwork ourselves. I had to submit the permit paperwork to the county twice before we were approved, and I had to meet with every single bank in our area before I found one that would approve us for a loan. If you're in this stage and you're feeling kind of down, it's okay. Just take what they tell you they won't accept, see if you can change it, and if they can't, just try and find another path. If you keep looking towards different paths, eventually one of them is going to work. During this time, I would recommend watching Rocky or The Martian or some other inspiring movie, because getting through all the red tape can feel like getting punched in the face or being abandoned on Mars, but there is help. If you keep trying and you keep asking questions, you will find a way out of this situation. Once we had all the paperwork done, we still had a vacant lot. We had nothing but bare land, and we had to dig our foundation.
You see that? What is that, girls?
It's an excavator.
Our house is pretty simple in terms of structure. It's 40 by 60 feet, and it only has 4 corners, so it's just a rectangle. We chose this because the ICF blocks that we chose to build with are 4 feet wide, and 40 and 60 are both divisible by 4, so we wouldn't need to do as much cutting. And because with each corner that you add, you're adding extra work that you need to measure and verify. For our purposes, we only needed the 4 walls. The extra layering can look really nice on a house, and if that's important to you, you should definitely do it, but for us, it just didn't add that much value to us. Our friend Dan came in and he helped us dig out the square that we had measured, and he put extra space in it just so we'd have room to work while we built our stem wall. Greg laid the plank down, made sure everything was square, and then it was time for concrete. We poured the concrete, double checked that everything was square one more time, and we were able to move on to the next step. We had to start our stem wall. We used ICF block from Amvic. We really like this brand. We've never tried any other brand, but this worked really well for us. Each block is kind of like a Lego block. It has little interlocking parts on the top that you can squish down, and in the middle there's little pieces of plastic where you can snap in the rebar where you need it to.
Push down hard. There you go.
Once our stem wall was built high enough, it was time for what I think is the hardest part of the project, which was rough-in plumbing. We chose a trunk and branch system where the main line is in the middle of the house and everything runs into it. It seems really simple on paper, but there's a lot of things that plumbers know that I just didn't. Like, there's certain angles that you have to go at, there's certain widths of pipe, and you've got to map this out all within the house that you haven't built yet. This part took a very long time, and I really wish that we would have hired someone out for it, but we're at the beginning of our project and we were so gung-ho to do this all ourselves that we just kept trekking through this. We did learn a lot. I feel like I grew as a person from doing this in both humility and perseverance, but if I had to do it again, it's not worth my time.
I just screwed myself on this.
After the rough-in plumbing was finally done, we were able to pour a concrete floor, but this still needs some prep work. We tried to get the ground level, and we called in a friend Lawrence to help us understand what level actually meant. We got the ground very flat with the help of our friend Lawrence. And on top of that, we put a layer of water barrier, a layer of insulation, some wire mesh that is going to help with the infrastructure as well as be able to tie our in-floor heating to. And then on top of that, we did one more layer of rebar, and then we were finally ready for concrete day. Our floor is finished concrete, and we decided to add a little bit of color to it. The crew came in that day along with the concrete trucks, and they just poured the concrete and they would finish it as they go. They even let me do a little section of it, but in the end, it was best to leave it to the professionals. After this, we just had to build the rest of our ICF wall up to the ceiling. Every layer we added, we would cut out slots for our doors and windows, and we would frame those in after those were done. If you have concrete coming down to pour into your ICF walls and the doors and windows don't have these window bucks in them, the concrete's just going to go everywhere. It's not going to hold. Adding these just made it that much easier when it was time to frame, and made concrete day a lot easier as well. After the ICF walls were built up to the ceiling, we also added penetrations for things like our dryer vents. We didn't want to drill through concrete later, so we just were able to add the penetrations before we actually poured the concrete. We added rebar to each layer just like we did for the stem wall, but we did something special in each of the doors and windows. In a traditional house, above a door or a window, you would have more reinforcement in your framing. So you need that same reinforcement, but there's a different way that you go about it. We added J-hooks above each of the doors and windows to help keep our building structurally sound. Just like you would in a traditionally built house, you have to add a top plate to the very top of the wall. Greg installed those, and after those were ready, we added the trusses. We have a lot of different types of trusses in our house. We have some that have storage, and we have some that have to do with a vaulted ceiling. So there's different trusses on each part. Builders FirstSource gave us a layout so we would know which truss would need to go in which spot in the package that they sent us. After looking at the prices for crane rental, we decided to try and do our roof trusses without a crane. Our friend Dan came back, and with his mini Skytrack, he would hoist the trusses up to the very top. Greg and Lawrence would drag the trusses down to where they needed to go, and they would toenail them in and add hurricane straps for reinforcement. They placed these every 2 feet in the layout order that Builders FirstSource had sent us. After the trusses were built in, we also tied our well into our house. This isn't exactly the order that it needed to happen, but it was a good time for it and it needed to happen anyway. We have one well on our property and it's shared between our 2 houses. So we dug a trench between the new house and the well, tied it into the system, and sent water all the way to the new house.
Oh, I just saw water come up.
Now that the trusses were up, we were ready to start roofing and framing. I had some time off from work during this time, and so I helped a lot with the framing. It was a lot of fun. I actually enjoyed this part quite a bit. I liked mapping out each of the rooms and building the wall on the floor and then hoisting it up. And this was one of my favorite parts, and I was probably the best person on the crew.
One-handed. He-Man. Holy hell.
For the roofing, we have a pretty simple roof. On top of our trusses, we have OSB, waterproofing, and then a metal sheet on top. I do not like roofing as much as I like framing. I just hung onto the trusses with all my might and tried not to fall off our house. Greg did just fine. He just swung around like a monkey, nailing things.
I'm kind of afraid of heights.
I guess everyone has their talents. This is just not mine. After learning a lesson from our plumbing, we decided to hire out our rough-in electrical. Electrical, if it goes wrong, it can be fatal or cause major damage to your house. So we decided to just contract that out. I still don't know a lot about rough-in electrical, and that's just fine. We were at a point where the envelope of our house was almost done. We had our roof, our floor, and our walls, but we still had dirt and outside air being able to come in through our windows and doors. To finish off the envelope, we added those in. The biggest thing is to just make sure that the door is flush, plumb, and level, and that all 3 dimensions are the way that you want them. The door manufacturer, as well as the engineer for your house, will have recommendations for what's best for your house, so I'm not gonna try and give you advice here. Up to this point, our house is very well insulated. We have a level of insulation on our floor. Our ICF walls are very thick and full of concrete, so they're very well insulated as well. The last piece that we needed to insulate was our roof. And to match the quality of the insulation that we had everywhere else, we decided to do a closed cell foam just on our roof. This is the most expensive way to insulate a roof, but it's also the most effective. We don't have the tools or the knowledge to insulate this ourselves, so we hired someone to do this for us. He put 1 layer on. It took a day to set up, and he came back a little bit later, put the 2nd layer on, and then did clean up, and then he was done.
It's a huge performance standard once
Sure.
you throw all this foam up top. Dude, this energy ain't going anywhere.
There's a few steps building a house where you really start to think, oh, this is going to be a house. Like, this is actually coming together. And one of those biggest ones is drywall. Before this, you have framing, and you can kind of picture what your house is going to look like. But until the drywall is there, you can't really get a good feel of how big a room is, like what it's going to feel like until that's all set up. Drywall is one of the most satisfying things to have done, but it's one of the hardest parts to get done. The drywall itself is really heavy, got a specific screw pattern, and if you screw too deep accidentally, you have to start completely over and add more screws. Then at the very end, you texture it, and you've got like a little tiny tool that you're trying to do this huge wall with. It does take a lot of time and effort, but it looks so good in the end. Yeah, starting this one was probably a mistake. Modern homes are so tight that you almost need something to bring fresh air in, and what we have is an ERV. ERVs can be used a lot, and they have a lot of benefits, especially in cities where there's a lot of air pollution. We live in the country, there's not a lot of air pollution, but during allergy season, there's a lot of pollen that gets in the air. It gets very high, and we have pretty bad allergies, so having this helps get fresh air into our house and evacuate stale air out. This has really helped during the winter months because it keeps the air flowing and it keeps fresh air coming in, and you don't get quite as sick all the time. Clean air was very important to us, so we added the ERV. Greg did the ductwork. We don't have an HVAC system, so the ductwork stands on its own, and he installed that all himself. After the drywall was completely set up, we were able to start painting. I took off and I started painting one room and just using a traditional roller and trying to cut it in. It took me all day just to do a single room. Luckily, we had a friend who had a paint sprayer and he let us borrow it just for this project. In comparison, the paint sprayer took a lot more to prep. You had to cover all of the doors, all of the floors, all of the windows, and make sure everything is very protected compared to the paint roller. But after that, doing the spray for the entire house only took one day. If I was to compare the two, the paint sprayer took a lot more prep. You had to make sure everything was covered from the floors and the doors and the windows compared to the roller where you could just kind of set out loosely. But the paint sprayer, it took us an entire day just to get the entire house, where I was only able to get one room with the roller. If I had to do this again, I'd probably use the paint sprayer again, even though it takes that extra prep, just because the actual part is so much faster and it takes less paint. One thing I would do differently about the paint is we had never used this before and we didn't wear a lot of protective equipment. The paint sprayer sprays the little paint particles and they just float in the air. They get in your nose, in your mouth, in your eyes, in your hair, and they make your hair all tangly and you're kind of coughing up paint. It was a really bad idea for us to not be wearing more protective equipment, and if I ever do this again, that is one thing that I will definitely change and one thing that I would advise you to do as well. Cabinets are pretty simple, but there's a couple of things I like to mention. When we did our framing, we also added blocking where we anticipated the cabinets to be, as well as things like our TV mount and our toilet paper holder. Your studs are a certain width apart, and unless you have blocking in there, you have to make sure that you put whatever it is in a line with those studs. Blocking just allows you to have more space to nail things across with these different areas. We don't have custom cabinets. That's not something that we really valued as we built this home. We bought our cabinets from Home Depot, and Home Depot carries lines of cabinets so you can get the same design in the different sizes that you need. We bought cabinets for our kitchen and our bathroom at the same time and just installed them all around the same time. In the bathrooms, we had to cut out the backs of the cabinets to make sure that the plumbing would come through. Our countertops are also from Home Depot. The way I picked these out was we have a really long stretch of cabinet, and this was the cheapest one that I could find that had a 10-foot section that I wouldn't have to lay two different countertops out. I'm really happy with the way they look though. I got really lucky in the design and it works really well with our house. They're very easy to install, and the laminate sides are also very easy to size, and then you just iron them on.
This feels like a prank.
I know. Even though we weren't comfortable doing the electrical rough-in, we did the electrical finishing ourselves. We bought pancake lights from Amazon and we installed them into each part of the house. It was pretty easy. You just follow the instructions on the manual.
Yeah. Woo!
And we also added in electrical outlets and switches.
Okay, there's 4 switches that control the circuit.
The state has minimal distance requirements for each of the outlets, but something to keep in mind is you probably won't regret having too many outlets, but you'll regret having too few. With that mindset, we added more outlets than we thought we needed. The state does the electrical licensing, so they came in and they checked our work. They gave us a list of what wasn't approved. We fixed those things, called them in one more time. They approved it and we were good to go. Once our electrical was approved, we were able to add in the appliances we bought. We bought our appliances actually on Black Friday, and the store agreed to delay delivery. So we were able to get those Black Friday deals while still not having to trip over all these washers and dryers all over our house while we're still constructing. The last thing that we installed was our mini splits. We have 2 outdoor units and 5 indoor head units. We also have in-floor plumbing, but because we don't have a propane hookup yet, we're not ready to start running that. There are DIY mini splits that you can buy. They're a little bit more expensive though, and we had a friend who had the tools and the knowledge to help us install the ones that are a little bit more professional without needing to pay that extra money. The final step of our project was cleanup. The one thing that they don't tell you about construction is just how often you're going to be cleaning up. Our shop vac definitely earned its keep during this time. As we were doing our final cleanup, I was really happy that we just had concrete floors because it made cleanup just a breeze. This last year has truly changed our lives. We're far enough along that we have our certificate of occupancy and we're able to live there, but we still have some outstanding projects that we want to finish. We want landscaping.
Hey. You know, I think xeriscaping out here especially is a great idea.
We need to finish our attic.
So I'm gonna try to rest them on this chair. Yeah.
And there's a few other projects that we'd love for you to join us on. If you want to see what other projects we have going on, subscribe and let us know what you'd like to see from us next. Happy building and good luck with your project.